As you can see by the full grow light rack behind me, I've been busy over the last 2 weeks starting my tomato, pepper, and eggplant seedlings in anticipation of the upcoming spring and summer gardening season. So over the last few years, I've developed, or not really developed, but adopted a method of starting seeds that not only is highly effective in preventing the dreaded damping off of seedlings, but it also helps get a jump on the extreme heat of the Sacramento summer and allows fruit set before the worst of it all sets in. So while my approach certainly isn't the only one that will result in strong, healthy seedlings, it has worked really well for me for the last few years, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to share it. So here goes. First, I'm going to go over my procedure, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of this method because it's certainly not perfect, and it's not right necessarily for everyone.
The first thing I'm going to do is start prepping my soil. While they do make special seed starting mixes that come pre-sanitized and sifted a little finer than the typical potting mix, that tends to be more expensive, which is fine if you're just potting up a few things, but I have a lot to do and that gets expensive in a hurry. So I just grabbed this organic potting soil that was on sale at my local Walmart. Doesn't necessarily have to be organic. I do try to keep, all the various synthetic additives to a minimum when I make my selection. The alternative had some kind of polymer-coated ammonium nitrate in it, and I gave a pass on that stuff, even though it was a little cheaper. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to run the potting soil through a soil sifter. It's just really quarter-inch hardware cloth nailed to a frame. The reason I do this is potting mixes tend to be a bit woody. There's chunks of, larger pieces of broken down peat moss, twigs, sticks, other various chunks of wood that can really interfere with starting small seeds like tomato seeds. So I put in the extra effort here and sift it a little finer than how it comes. Again, this can be avoided by buying a designated seed starting mix, but you will be paying a little more for that. There are a number of recipes where you can make your own seed starting mix, but to be honest, I only have so much DIY work in me. Here, I'm actually going to bake my soil in the oven for an hour or two at about 350 degrees. The reason I do this is to kill off things like fungal spores, and it's important to remember that fungus is what causes damping off, and that's when you one day you're looking at your seedlings and it looks like somebody pinched them all off and they're all dead. Also kill off fungus gnat eggs, which those can be a real irritation. It's important to cover the soil. It's at 350, so it's below the ignition temperature for most, woody materials, but just to be on the safe side, I put some kind of cover on my soil when I bake it, just to make sure there's not enough airflow to start a fire. You see here, I had to actually turn the lid upside down to get everything in the oven. But yeah, usually an hour or two heats it through sufficiently to kill off any nasties. I prefer to start my tomatoes and other nightshades in large containers like these 32-ounce repurposed food containers here. The reason is I start my stuff early. They get big before I put them out. They're like 10, 11 weeks under grow lights. And if I start in cell packs or smaller pots, I have to repot, and that's aggravating and it causes, some shock to the plant. A lot of what I'm doing this year are using these giant 36-ounce drink cups I found online. These are actually specifically made for the classic college game of beer pong. They even came with a handful of these oversized ping pong balls here. I just gave those to my daughter, though not for beer pong because she's 4. You will obviously have to poke holes in the bottom of these. There's a couple ways to go about that. You can get a drill or carefully with a knife or a pair of scissors so you don't split. I just heated up a nail on my grill outside and melted through. I like melting the holes in them because I don't get a lot of plastic dust going everywhere, though you're going to want to do it outside on account of the fumes. But once the drainage holes are poked, you're going to want to sanitize. I especially reuse pots. You're going to find that sanitization is a running theme in my seed starting. I find a quick bath in a mild bleach solution is more than sufficient to kill off any bacteria or fungal spores that might cause problems. Next, going to add some soil to the cups. I fill about 2/3 of the way. This leaves a little extra space. Most nightshades will root out of their stems, and adding soil after they grow promotes a healthier root ball. I'm going to also label each cup before I start watering when the tape might not stick. I do compact the soil down in the cup a bit. I'm not trying to make something like hard packed concrete, but if you just leave it loose and fluffy, when you add your water, it's going to collapse down and might end up without enough soil in the cup. Speaking of watering, I always water before I plant, and you can see why here. When you add your water to dry potting or seed starting mix, it's often very hydrophobic, and a lot of that stuff, a lot of the components are going to float to the surface like you see here, and that can obviously disrupt a freshly planted seed. You're not going to know where it's going to be after watering. So I hydrate everything first, pour in the water, give it a few minutes, let everything soak up well, and then I go from there. All right, now it's time to prepare my seeds. The tomato seeds I'm planting today are a bush dwarf patio variety cherry tomato that I've had great success with over the last season. And you guessed it, the first thing I'm going to do is actually sanitize my tomato seeds. I'm going to do this with a quick soak in some 3% hydrogen peroxide solution. This is what you'll get off the shelf in any pharmacy or big box store. Nothing special. Sorry about accidentally bumping the tripod there a few times. It's really hard to work around a tripod while doing all this stuff, actually. It doesn't have to go in for too long, maybe a minute or two. When that's up, I'm just going to pour into that strainer there. Makes it easy to separate the seeds from the hydrogen peroxide. I do give these a quick rinse under the faucet, followed by drying off on a towel or paper towel. This is a more important step than you would think. Trying to deal with wet seeds and wet fingers is just going to stick. It's going to be kind of a miserable experience trying to do that with everything sticking to your skin. So patting these nice and dry is really a small helpful step in the process. All right, now it's time to actually plant the seeds. The first thing I'm going to do is take this pencil and poke holes that are 1/4 inch, maybe 1/2 inch deep. And yes, I sanitized the pencil before using it. Next, drop in the seeds, as you see there. And then I'm going to pinch those holes closed and pat them down a little bit. Really nothing too complicated or advanced here. Seed starting 101 is you always put more seeds in a pot than you're going to use. I do 2 or 3. This is going to accommodate any duds that might have occurred in the seed packet. Also, if you do get 2 seeds per pot, you can propagate the cuttings. I'm going to go over that in a later video. Now everything's going to live under grow lights for the next 10 to 11 weeks. I have these set to run for 16 hours, 8 hours off. The long growing day compensates for the fact that my grow lights are not nearly as bright and efficient as natural sunlight, so they need a little extra. If previous years are any indication, this will still be sufficient in the next 10 weeks to get these to a growth of about 10 to 12 inches by the time I transplant in mid-April. That's exactly what I want to kind of get ahead of the heat. These are, my timer is set to run these primarily during the overnight hours when power is a little cheaper. It's very likely that while you're waiting for the seed to germinate, the very top layer, that 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch layer of soil, is going to dry out under the grow lights. This obviously needs to be kept sufficiently moist for the seed to germinate. So if drying occurs, you're going to want to use a spray bottle to re-moisten the soil surface. Pouring in with a watering can, that tends to disrupt everything. It could dislodge the soil deposited on the surface where it's just going to keep drying out. 4 days later, my seedlings have just emerged from the soil. This is when I'm going to cease any form of top watering and switch to bottom watering. And of course, bottom watering is where you add the water to the tray below the cups. Capillary action then pulls water up into the dry parts of the soil. Ideally, you want a dry surface and damp roots. This is going to reduce the chances of damping off, which is caused by a fungus, and fungus loves a damp environment. So to save your seedlings, switch to bottom watering once the plants emerge. So here I have a bottle of copper fungicide. I apply this as a precaution every 1 to 2 weeks to my seedlings. This phase is where the seedlings really are their most vulnerable over the next, maybe 2 to 3 weeks after emerging, and I just don't want to take any chances. To demonstrate how much better tomato and other nightshade seedlings do when you sanitize and take a little extra care, I'm doing 3 pots of tomatoes completely the wrong way. I haven't sanitized anything at all, and I'm doing these in peat pots, which make it tremendously hard to regulate moisture. And I'm going to set these on a sunny windowsill where I know they're not going to get adequate light. I'm actually trying to get these to damp off, so in my next video I can show what damping off looks like. So why do I put in so much extra effort and extra steps in starting my tomatoes? About 3, maybe 4 years ago, one of our first years gardening, we started close to 100 tomato, pepper, eggplant seedlings, and we did them, the traditional method, had them up against a sunny window, south-facing window, and everything started out doing really great. But then the seedlings started to get leggy as they tried to reach that sunlight that was still low on the horizon through a window. We did them in peat pots, and everything, having trouble regulating how damp everything was. And then one day we came home, and it looked like somebody had come in and pinched off every last tomato stem. Did a little research and found that was caused by, that's what's called damping off. It's caused by a fungus, and if your seedlings are leggy, which means they're really tall and skinny and trying to reach the light, they are more susceptible, because the stems are thinner, they're more susceptible to that fungus that causes it. Also, doing things in peat pots, everything stayed and it got moldy and damp, and it was just a complete mess and really discouraging. So since then, I've made a real effort to put in extra steps and do all of that extra sanitization that you just saw, keep everything really nice and clean, and really try to cut down on the fungus. So the big disadvantages to this method, of course, extra cost and extra space. Obtaining, unless you can find, a lot of previously used containers to convert into starter pots. Buying bigger pots costs more money, and that's all there is to it. Coming up with all of the soil to fill those big pots also costs extra money. Additionally, it eats up more space. Now, this isn't going to be an issue if you are a sane and reasonable gardener, unlike me, who has to do everything completely overboard. And if you just want to start, maybe half a dozen tomato plants, and like a content, reasonable person, you're happy with that, doing things in bigger pots with more soil and taking up a little extra space under your grow lights, that's not going to be a big deal. When you want to do 50, 60, 70, 100 plants like this, that is a definite, you notice it in terms of budget and time and space. The big advantages that I find with this is, number one, I don't have to water these pots very often. Spray them down, of course, to keep the surfaces moist, but the pots themselves retain water for a week or more. Additionally, I'm not going to have to repot anything as the plants get big over the next 2.5 months. This cuts down on a lot of work, and in years past, every time I've repotted my tomatoes from, say, small 3-inch pots up to something bigger, I've lost a few plants. So it's nice to be one and done in these 32-ounce to 36-ounce containers. So, are all of my extra sanitization steps, the giant containers that cost more, the extra soil, the extra space, the 16-hour days under the grow lights, is this all overkill? Possibly, but my philosophy has always been that overkill is how you win. Now, it's very possible that you can have good, healthy tomato seedlings and consequently tomato plants without doing so much meticulous, tedious work. But I've noticed that since I switched to this method, my seedlings over the last couple of years have really just been strong, healthy, and amazing. So I'm sticking with it.
As I post this video, my seedlings are now mostly 1 to 2 weeks old. Really, all I have to do here is keep them alive for the next 2.5 months until transplanting. So stay tuned, because in April, I'm going to be posting a follow-up vid that covers long-term seedling care, propagating some of the cuttings if you choose to do so, sun hardening them, and finally transplanting them. So that's all I really have for today. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it.